Yeah, we're live. It is 6:36. A little bit early tonight. But tonight I want to talk about twin turbo setups, mostly because I get this question an awful lot. And it kind of, I don't know, it kind of surprises me because you don't see a lot of this, excuse me, with most twin turbo setups that I see on whatever they're on, whether they're on, it could be an LS, a small block Chevy, the old Gale Bank stuff, whatever big blocks or whatever kind of twin stuff on a V8 in particular. On a six-cylinder, we could talk about that too on any twin system really. And the question is that I get is, hey Richard, if you have a twin setup, like you guys can see the photo that I have up here. What I did is this is a junkyard LS. We took the stock exhaust manifolds, the stock truck manifolds, turned them around. I made simple extensions off them. On one side, we had the factory flange to attach to the stock exhaust manifold. On the other end, we had a 3-inch V-band. And then that was feeding, basically each side had these adapters that I had used. One side was a V-band. The other side, straightforward, had a provision for the wastegate. You can see there's dual wastegates here. And then the other side was used to mount the turbo. It can either be another V-band or it can be, I think that these were T4s. And so we can mount small T4 turbos on them, and then we can run the turbos, the exit of the turbos. These had 3-inch, just kind of, 45-degree bends to kind of get the exhaust aimed away from the motor. At Westech, there's a lot of airflow going through there, so it kind of washes all of this stuff back. But this kind of thing is one of the things that I get a lot. Oh, all that exhaust will go into the turbo. I'm like, well, judging by the NA power and the turbo power, it's not doing that. So we're just getting EGR in this setup, particularly if they were in the dyno room with what's going on. Now, ideally, yeah, they could be longer than that and they could extend back. And normally we would do that. In fact, on this application, we would just use our power cones that we have, which is just a cone section of exhaust, to allow us to go from like a 3-inch here, a straight section 3-inch, on the exit side of these turbos, on the exiting the turbo, and then just step it up to like 3.5 or 4 or whatever we wanted to do. So the cones are kind of nice because it's not just an immediate step. It's it's a nicer transition, kind of a tapered thing. But the question for tonight is, as you can see, each side of the V8 is feeding one turbo on the hot side. And then we have an individual wastegate for that, and then we have the turbo, and we exit for the turbo. And then on the cold side, the compressor side, these turbos are both feeding into what is essentially a dual core intercooler, but then they merge together and they exit out of the center after passing through each one of the cores. They exit out the center and then go into the intake manifold. In this particular case, we weren't trying to make a lot of power. In fact, this particular test, if you go back and look at the video I have up where we did all this testing, when we looked at this, we compared this setup to a remote setup. So I made really, really long exhausts off of the manifolds. We turned them around so they exit out the back, and then made really, really long ones that go up and loop back so that we could show, hey, with this kind of distance, the equivalent of the distance back to the back of a truck or a car, what does it do? And also different kinds of turbos. We compared single turbos. I did lots of stuff off of this during this particular setup. You can see we have a provision for back pressure off of the side that you're seeing. I think that's an aluminum line, and it's a flare fitting. We screw that in to a steel fitting where this exhaust, the exit out of that exhaust manifold, the piece of tubing basically that connects the stock exhaust manifold to that elbow that I talked about, to that 3-inch V-band. We drill and tap that and then put a fitting in, a flare fitting, and then we could screw this piece of tubing on, and that tubing runs up and then ends in a piece of rubber hose after, because the aluminum tubing basically is taking the temperature kind of, but it sends the back pressure reading up to the dyno so that we have a data log point for the back pressure versus the boost pressure, and all that works out good. And then you can see we have all the various lines and feed lines for the oiling and all of that stuff. Just there's a lot of stuff that goes to make all of this turbo stuff work, especially twins and twin wastegates and a blow off valve there's a lot of plumbing going on there. But the question that I get is, you can see there's an individual exhaust feeding each one of the turbos. So the question I get is and people get elaborate. I think that these people just sit around and think this stuff up. But the question is, okay, Richard, you have one side feeding one turbo, one side feeding the other. Do they need to be balanced in any way? And if you look at the cold side of the turbos, is there a balance tube that needs to go between these two so that we make sure that we get the same amount of exhaust to one turbo to the other? Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you think that there needs to be a balance tube on the exhaust? On any sort of factory twin turbo, do you see that? On any of the race turbos that you see, do you see any sort of balance tube? I never do, and I might even argue that we have a balance on this, on the cold side of this, certainly, because they both come together. So if they were off somehow, one side to the other, if there was, I don't think it's a problem. On the Big Bang motors, which we ran the same kind of intercooler with, we even had different size exhaust sections from the shorty headers in that case that were flipped upside down. Shorty headers, one side was a 2.5, one side was a 3, and it didn't seem to make any difference. People get really concerned and nitpicky about that kind of stuff. And I'm like, look, we're running like 28 pounds on a 4.8 and a 5.3 in this case. I'm like, you should be worried about that. You should be worried about those big things and not these other things. But does the hot side need a crossover? And then then we kind of go off the deep end. Okay, does it need a crossover? Well, what happens if we did weird crossovers like we want to see tested on the exhaust? What happens if we did an H pipe? What happens if we did an X pipe? What happens if we, what happens if we did a crossover before and after? All of these different possibilities. People want to see that tested for some reason. Honestly, I think that the best thing would be to test the length like we did, and then maybe test diameter, and then you could test heat wraps and stuff. But like on an engine dyno, it's not really a great place to do that. And those sort of things, to find out what kind of minimal effect a lot of these things would have, you have to really be structured in your testing. And like when we did the test with the remote turbo versus this setup, we're in some of these tests, we want to see big changes. I don't want to see 100 RPM or whatever, because honestly, on these turbo things, I don't know that we can get within 100 RPM of spool rate on these things anyways, because I don't think we can get the temperature and the load and all of the different variables on these turbo things to where we could get it that precise. That's hard to do. And so I don't look for that. I don't want to tell somebody, oh yeah, it's like the people want to see. One of the big questions also is, journal bearing versus ball bearing. I want to see like response rate of those two, of two identical turbos with just the change there in the oiling. And I'm like, you're barking up the wrong tree for that. That's not going to be a thing. Once the journal bearing has oil, there's very, very little resistance there. I don't know. I'd like to see a measurable change. I'd like to see if somebody that doesn't want that to be true, and so they test it to make it true, in a way to make it true. I'd like to see somebody do an actual test on that where the turbo was exactly the same and the conditions were exactly the same, yada, 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 where the only difference was, the different kind of bearings. And honestly, I don't think we're going to see very much, if anything at all. It's not going to be a lot. It would only be a little, if anything at all. And I don't know that'd be a problem. That's one of the difficulties with these turbo things is testing them on the dyno. And particularly, I have this discussion with some of the other dyno guys where they're trying to test it at 1,500 horsepower or 2,000 horsepower. I'm like, why are you testing it there? You can't make the thing repeatable at 2,000 horsepower. Particularly if you're struggling just to get the thing to run at 2,000 horsepower, you can't do a back-to-back test. And then they show me these results. I'm like, that's nothing. That's not a real test. That's not. You have differences in so many different things that could be the answer for the thing that you're telling me this is. I'm like, that's not really a thing. That's why with turbo stuff, it's really hard to do. And the higher the horsepower you try to test it with, the harder it is to be, absolutely repeatable. And then to try to change something to make that, what if we ran this, like on a 5-liter Ford, what if we ran a RPM air gap intake manifold? What if we ran a Victor Jr.? What if we ran a RPM 2? What if we ran a Systemax or whatever? You got to make sure that everything's right. And then testing it under boost. That's why I tell people, particularly for the things that I like to test, and for the things that we're selling for Richard Holder Performance, because we're looking at low buck stuff and junkyard stuff and that kind of thing, and we're looking at that market. We're not looking at race guys, because that's not. I mean, I like racers and I want to see them go fast, but 2,000 horsepower, 2,500 horsepower stuff is not. That's not our market. That's not what we want to look at. And like I said, testing that stuff is just, it's problematic. But to let me know in the comments if you guys think that, does there need to be any kind of crossover? Do we think it would do anything? Like if you put a crossover between these two tubes, between the two hot sides, do you think we'd see anything? Would it just change? Maybe my discussion, when I had this discussion with people, is that I think if you add more volume, just like we do when we have a remote turbo, that if anything, you could affect lag maybe, because it has to fill that, once it's filled, it's okay. I said, but it has to fill it when you go from no exhaust energy and very little exhaust flow to trying to get a lot of exhaust energy and exhaust flow to get the turbo spooled up. If you have more volume in there, it's going to be harder. And it also is a heat sink for taking heat out of it, because you got more surface area. So again, you can get into all sorts of discussions on this stuff and and maybe not come back with any absolute answers. People want black and white information here on real gray areas, and on real gray areas that have, maybe nothing. I did see, and maybe it was a funny post that somebody posted. I just want to mention it because you know how we love all the dimple stuff. Dimpled propellers for boats. I'm like, okay, at least that's spinning and turning through water. Maybe, I want all of this magic stuff to work, but yeah, magic sometimes doesn't do what we think it does. Sometimes. Twin turbo time. Let's go. Be cool to take a single 600 horsepower turbo and then add another one post turbo. Add another what? What are we adding and where are we adding it? Scottish, what's going on? Not to interrupt, but our factory coil pack suitable for 800 horsepower junkyard 5-speed turbo builds? Yes, the 1,500 horsepower stuff that we did used factory coil packs. We used the LS3 style ones, but we have used truck ones too. Are two turbos more efficient, requiring less boost for a given horsepower? No. Not than a single turbo that's sized like the twins are. Good to see you. Home from work. Very good. With either of your twin setups, journal ball bearing, would 10 to 14 pounds of boost be a safe and happy zone for those turbos to run for a long time? The boost isn't going to affect them. I mean, not in that range. That would be fine. Twin turbo just rolls off the tongue. It does. It's twin turbo. It's like turbo-y goodness. Prepping to build a 4L80 NP261 transfer case and build the front and rear differentials and prep to put the twins. Here's their happy zones. The thing that you're worried about for the turbos is a non-starter thing. That's not a thing. Worry about tune and getting enough fuel and all that. Putting a 5.3 in a Sonoma. I have a sloppy stage 3 VS88 and a turbo 400. I expect 800 horsepower without running really high boost. Okay. It's going to be, I'm hoping that you have a stall converter for that, because that's going to be laggy with that cam and that turbo. And then I don't know what stall speed you have. Maybe you have a high stall speed and it won't be too much of a problem, but that's not the turbo that I would pick or the cam that I would pick to make 800 horsepower. But if it's a drag race car and you got a stall speed and you're drag racing it, you could make that work. Off topic, but what is your preferred method when cleaning old head gasket material off an aluminum LS block without marring it? I use a razor blade. You can also use the little spinny like Scotch-Brite discs. Turbos are rated in airflow, not boost. How much airflow does your 6-liter have? 1 bar. Yeah. When people talk about boost, I get a little bit leery. Talking twin turbos, do you have any tests, vids? I don't have any videos on the twins yet. Is a stock oil pump good enough for 2 turbos on LS? We have done that a lot, but honestly, if I was putting a motor together or changing it, putting twins on it, I wouldn't be opposed to upgrading the oil pump. Because it does take oil flow away. We know that when we put a turbo on there, that the oil pressure is lower than when we don't have a turbo on there. What PSI wastegate spring are the setups? I think they range from 3 or 4 up to 7 or 8. I honestly think we should get a stiffer one too to make it go to 10 or something. Oil pump and supporting mods will be done. Should I use a milling high pressure, high volume? A high volume is fine. Proper ring gap is as important as air fuel and timing. Exactly, yeah. Ring gap is a must for turbo stuff. X-pipes pre-turbos would sound cool, if anything. I don't know if they would. I don't know if the turbo still would muffle that. That might be a thing. I tend to think that X-pipes after the turbo would make more of a difference on the exhaust note than pre-turbo. But having never tried it, I can't swear to that. 6.6 builds, what's going on, man? Twin versus sequential. Sequential is potentially better for response rate, but it's way more complicated plumbing, though. Have you tested any electric turbos? I haven't. How much boost kind of stock bottom end 5.7 hold? Not very much. I don't ever take those blocks past the 1,000 horsepower. So it's not boost, it's power output. You ever think of offering a cam spring injector flash package for the LS? Yes, we will. As soon as we're done doing the beta testing on the tune stuff, we'll have some of those. Sequential turbos, I feel like they would spool faster than having parallel turbos while making the same horsepower. Maybe yes, maybe no. Depends on if you have 2 turbos that are the same size and one turbo on a sequential that's bigger than the other. Did you make those so that they're equivalent? The thing about sequentials is that you're having all the flow go to the smaller turbo and spool up, and then switching over to the big one, or feeding in the bigger one. That works really well, especially from the factory, because they can make all of that work, but it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to have sequential turbos. 76 watching. Don't forget to hit the like. Yeah, we got, I'm showing 80 right now. And then compound turbos that Bill mentioned are something different than sequential turbos. Plan on doing any twin turbo tests on Jimmy's Tahoe? Probably not on the Tahoe, but we are going to do it on the engine dyno. I'm going to be running that fairly soon. How much is head gasket bore effect compression? Go to Wallace Racing compression calculator online. It's Wallace Racing compression calculator. Just do a search for that. And you can plug in all of the different head gasket sizes. Both thickness and bore have an effect on static compression. You're going to choose the gasket size for the bigger of the two, either the combustion chamber or the bore size on the block. What setup would you choose to safely run 700 horsepower in a daily? 700 wheel horsepower. Do you have a motor already, Jason? I mean, it's really easy to make 700 wheel horsepower. That's a 5.3 and a cam and a G42 turbo. That's really easy. Your like button did a burnout. If an engine blows up on the dyno, does it mess up the dyno? Not usually. Usually something gets hurt, and then we're that's part of what the dyno guy does, is he's watching all of that stuff. Like, we're not watching what I'm doing, and I'm not watching power or anything because I don't care about that. We just make sure that the way that I do it, and this is the way that Brule, I think, does it too. He's the guy that showed me what to look for to teach me how to run the dyno. When you roll into it, what you want to see is the same torque number that you see every time you roll into it, so that you know that everything's working right. But then what I do, and I think what he does, is we keep an eye on the air fuel, if we have an air fuel gauge, and we're monitoring that, and the oil pressure, and then we look up at the engine while it's running to make sure that things are not falling off or whatever. And then you just keep kind of bouncing between those things to make sure everything's bad. If you hear anything or you feel anything or you see anything, you come back on the throttle and stop the motor. And there's a kill button too if you want to just stop the dyno. You can also do that. Compound turbos work amazing on big rigs. Yeah, diesel stuff, that's really pretty common and works well. Crossover might even out the pulses in the manifold, since most V8s do not fire for equally spaced events. That was one of the discussions that the gentleman that was asking about it, trying to get it evenly spaced. And then the discussion, as you know, goes to, well, then you do 180-degree headers, or what? Then it goes to 8 into 1, and then it goes into all the different things. Jason Miller, what is the no response? I feel like sequential turbos on diesels would be more beneficial than compound because they suffer from not being able to spool. I don't think it's hard to get a diesel turbo to spool. Compounds spool perfectly on diesels. I agree. Especially when they're scienced out, which mine was not when I ran compound turbos on the LS. They were just 2 turbos that I had laying around. Truck is still in pieces, just trying to develop a direction to go with. 5.3 low buck truck cam, springs, and a turbo. Yep, that will easily get you there. In fact, it will take you to 1,000 at the wheel if you want to do that. I'm zero decking the block and bought head gaskets with a 39 compressed thickness, 425 bore, flat top piston, 2 valve release, 10.3, what I got on the calculator. So you have a flat top piston and a 425 bore. Do you have a short stroke on this or something? And then what size is your chamber? When moving, yes, but they have a hard time spooling on the brake. Why would that be the case? What's the difference between a G42 1200 and an RHP 1050? The 1200 is cheaper, but which one would be best? If you have a 6-liter, you should get a G42. A 1050 is a GTX. It's a G35, but it's a much smaller turbo, and it's not what I would recommend because I don't think it has the right hot side for a 6-liter. We will have another single that will be between those two, but after running the G42 on the 5.3 and the Tahoe and driving it around on the street, it worked fantastic on the 5.3. On a 6.0, it's going to be even better. You will love that turbo on a 6-liter. Is a 6-liter iron block better than a 5.7? Yeah, by miles, by leaps and bounds, by like 50% better. I saw a Ford breakdown. What will an 8.1 and L96 stock bottom end hold? You want to know what each one of them hold? I don't know what an 8.1 will do. I think LT has done 1,000 horsepower with one of them. An L96, I don't know what block that is. How do you increase compression if you're already at the limit of hitting the piston with valve lift? Well, valve lift doesn't hit pistons unless you don't have enough valve relief for the duration of your camshaft. So we would need to talk about duration before we talk about valve lift, because valve lift isn't the thing. When you're at peak valve lift, the piston's probably an inch or more down the bore. when that happens. So that's not really a thing. So the duration is the thing that's causing you to have a piston to valve issue. And then the way that you increase compression is you have a dome piston that matches the shape. And guys are really specific about this when they're trying to get high compression. You have a dome shape that matches the shape of the combustion chamber, but still allows a valve relief so that the valve doesn't hit the piston. I don't know the science, but in the performance diesel world, you have to feed it a lot of nitrous to get it to spool at the drag strip. On the big power dyno stuff, they may even use a full hit. Well, you're talking about a motor that was a 300 horsepower motor and maybe 600 foot-pounds of torque. And then now they want to make 1,000 or 2,000 horsepower with it and 3,000 foot-pounds of torque. So they're using much, much bigger turbos, just like would be a problem on gas engines. When you're oversizing the turbo and going beyond what the thing is normally sized for, then yeah, if you put a big turbo on something that it wasn't sized right. But the factory compound stuff works great. Have you tested oilless turbos? I have not. Comp Turbo is the name of them. We tried one way back when they first came out, and it killed itself. I think that they have solved that since then, but it's not something I think that I would trust. What cam do you recommend for a 5.3 paired with the next gen 7875? Well, the camshaft wouldn't have anything to do with the turbo, really. What else do you want the camshaft to do? Like, what power output do you want? Do you have a stock converter? What do you want the idle to be like? What intake manifold and RPM range and all that is going to determine what kind of camshaft you want. L96 is a flex fuel LY6. So if it's an iron block like the LY6, then you can run as much power as you want with it. I mean, we did 1,500 with the LY6. I don't think it's going to last very long like that, but it will do it a couple of times. .880 block, 4020 bore, 348 stroke, 5.7 rods, Vortec heads milled to 63. So Darren, what is your question here? I thought you said it's that you don't want to put a 4125 bore gasket on a 40, what did you say? On a 4020 bore head and block. You should be able to find a gasket that's better than that. Is there any benefit to using T4 over V-band housing, which is best? According to Garrett, the V-band's way better. What have you run at Bonneville? I ran this as one of them. So this is the Civic. That one went to 26 and change. We set records with the Suzuki. I think back in the back there's some land speed record things. With Volkswagen, with a Suzuki Kazashi. Volkswagen was both a Jetta and then a Beetle. The Sprint, I set records on. We didn't take the Sprint to Bonneville, though. We only took that to the East Coast Timing Association. Unless it states no more than one turbo sequential is a loophole. I have an Overland Suburban 1500. I tow Sea-Doos and my quad. I have a 6-liter LQ9 out of an 03 Escalade. Do you have any suggestions for head and cam? Yeah, if you're going to still just tow with it and drive it around and you're not racing it around, I would put one of our low buck truck cams and springs in it. You're probably going to have to go up in injector size unless that LQ9 had bigger injectors in it. And for heads, you have 317s. You should probably put 799s on it. You can also go the Recport route. So you could put factory rec port 821, 823, and then a matching rec port manifold if you want to do that. It will definitely make a lot more power. It'll be a little softer down low though. Really like to have more time to discuss my build with you. I'm doing all the porting on the heads and oiling mods to the block. First time doing it either. You don't have to do it, but I want to. Okay. 600 to 700 horsepower L96, somewhat safe as a daily. Yeah, that's not an issue at all. If you have a L96 bottom end with a stock one with ring gap, 700 horsepower is just a really, really small cam and boost. I mean, you got to have springs and injectors, but that's not hard at all. Have you ever encountered a 10,000 RPM small block that was able to be driven as a daily driver? No. 425 bore gaskets barely go around the stock chamber on the Vortec heads. Pretty much matches it for the most part. So you're saying a Vortec head wants a 4125 bore gasket? I would find that hard to believe. With enough money, anything could be a daily. What light flywheel works best on an LS engine? I don't know. Is there a stock LS injector that will fill 500 horsepower? Yeah, the factory 50-pound flex fuel injectors will easily do that. In fact, they'll do 800 horsepower. Richard, I have a 496 Forge big block. Got a 300 cam. Bought Brodix heads. Are they tension to turbo it? Are they too small for twin turbos and want about an 871? No, the heads are never too small for that. So those heads should flow fairly well. What do they flow? I'm sure they got to flow like 350 or something, right? And then what intake are you using? You can run a blower on it if you want. You can run twin turbos on it. And then the power output will be just dictated by the turbos that you pick. I'm new to LS stuff. I'm only familiar with small blocks. Finished up on my 8.1 intake. Injector rails are done. Nice. Just need to clean it up a bit and do testing on my truck. Are you going to run that intake on something? Or are you going to do some dyno testing? Ever watched The World Fastest Indian? Yes, many, many times. It's very good. Got in here late. What's the big difference between a 1050 and a GT 1200? I'm wanting 700 wheel horsepower on the 6.2. You want a G42. A G42 1200. We have those at richardholdnerperformance.com. That's the turbo you would want. If I had a way to send a picture to you, I would, of the gasket on the head to show you exactly what I'm talking about. There's Summit Racing G2630s. Okay. I don't see how a I don't see how a factory gasket for a 4-inch bore, even a 20 over 4-inch bore, and a Vortec head is going to require a 4125 bore gasket. That doesn't sound right. I don't know why it would need to be that big. I don't know why. 425 bore head gasket for an LS7. Yeah, or a 400 small block. Are you familiar with Speedmaster? Yes. Yeah, I've tested a lot of their stuff. A lot. I've tested some of their stuff. Some of their stuff, yo. We have low buck truck cams are back in stock too for people that were waiting on that. Make sure it all works on my truck. I don't have the means. Let's see. Did I test at the moment? It's an open source intake, so there's a few different people making it for themselves. Well, if you want me to test it, we can definitely test it on this 8.1. Burt Monroe documentary is awesome. Yeah, that was very, very cool. What would you recommend for head gasket bore oversized cylinder? When we do a head gasket, we do it for the big block stuff is an interesting example. So if you look at most of the combustion chambers on big block, particularly aftermarket heads, they're big. They're bigger than the bore is. And so you have to have a gasket that's matched for the bore size of the combustion chamber and not necessarily the bore size of the block, because those may require a 4,400 or a 4,500 bore size. And when you only have a 4,250 or a 4,280 or whatever, 4,300, 4,310. And so you have to do that. And so it's not ideal. Now, L94 from an Escalade came from the factory with 54-pound injectors. I believe those are good for 600 horsepower on pump gas. They're good for 800 horsepower on pump gas. And that's only at a 0.5 brake specific. So they're fine. They would do 600 on E85. They have a 6-inch bare block I was thinking about getting because the wrecking yards here in Florida want so much for crusty motors. It's going to use the block to do a 408. Yeah, you can. Are you doing a what was the Speedmaster comment then? I don't think you should get an aftermarket block to do that. You can go to a wrecking yard and get an LS motor a lot cheaper than you can buy an aftermarket block for. Like the Speedmaster side draft stack injection. Yeah, I have tested those. The problem with any kind of stack injection is getting it all synchronized and happy. On the valve side of the chamber, it's almost even with the edge of the chamber. I was just wondering if those would work for unshrouding the valves. I think you're worried about something you shouldn't be worried about. I saw the 4.3 V6 from Skog and Dickey make 1,400 with twin turbos, complete motor with turbos, weighed 400 pounds. I saw the one that Kurt Urban dyno tested that did that. I don't know if that's the same one. Let me make sure it all works. I'll ship it to you. If we get a chance, we can test it. Yeah. T4 or V-band for the L86. I don't know that we have both of those for G42s. If we do, the V-band works better. But the difference between those two, you don't have to worry about that because you're not trying to max the turbo out. Did you, I'm sure, read about or hear about Supreme Court ruling to roll back EPA powers? I would like just some oversight on the EPA. I would like them to explain why they're doing what they're doing, because it has nothing to do with, it doesn't seem to have any logic applied to it about, you know, changing emissions and stuff. Because if that was it, then there would be much easier, less expensive ways to do it. L9862 with active management, similar engines that have rear cooling ports and heads riveted closed. Do you feel it's worthwhile to upgrade to 4 corners? We've never run any of those on the dyno. What about hairline cracks in a junkyard block? Where are the cracks that you're talking about? We try not to run cracked blocks. Loving my Truck Plus cam on my 6-liter, PRC 2.5 heads. Running out of fuel, I hope the 50-pound injection order will be enough. Yeah, if it's an NA motor, there'll be more than enough. You won't make all of what 50-pound injectors will do on an NA motor. I have a 6-liter aiming for 800 horsepower. Want to use a G42 after seeing your vids, looking at BTR stage 2 and sloppy stage 2. Could you recommend specifics like heads for different cam? For 800 horsepower, you don't need different heads. You can use the heads that are on it. Just put springs. You just need injectors. You need that G40. If you have that G42 turbo on it, you're going to make 800 horsepower. So that's not a problem. I don't know what you're wanting to do with drivability, and if you're going to drag race it. I wouldn't pick either one of those cams. I wouldn't pick a sloppy stage 2, and I wouldn't pick a BTR stage 2 turbo cam either. I would pick if you're going to go with BTR, I would pick a Truck Norris cam, or our Truck Plus or a low buck truck, because you don't need it. It all depends on what else you want the cam to do. The turbos are not going to care about that. It's going to make 800 without any problem. Kurt Urban did it at Skog and Dickey. Okay, yeah, no, I saw that. I sent Kurt we talked a little bit via text about that. I was asking him about it, and just congratulated him because it was his birthday recently. I'd like to go back and see the guys at Skog and Dickey. I would like to go. I mean, I like Dyno guys, so I would like to go see some more Dyno stuff. And that was a cool motor. I mean, if you get you get a motor, I think that they ran. I'll bet that they ran 30 pounds or something like that on that. So I'm thinking that the thing was a 350 or better horsepower motor when it was NA, and that's maybe 400. Mainly just a piston rod deal. It's not just a piston rod deal. It's a lot more than that. Spark plugs and gaps on the heads, cam, long tube, truck. D, what is your question? Scrolling. Spark plugs and gap on the heads. Heads, cam, long tube, truck. What is your question about? And maybe I missed something that happened earlier. Spark plugs, is it a turbo motor? Is it an NA motor? What is it? Apparently, an EPA would have to prove that excess CO2 would have a direct correlation to warming for them to enforce restrictions. I'm foggy and all alert legal terminology. I just want, like, if we have to have our cars smogged, I just want the smog check to just be an actual smog check, not a discussion about what you did if you modified something. Just give me a number that I have to pass, and then I'll make it do that, and then that's it. That's what I want. And if we have it be better than that, better than the whatever number that they specify that they want this, because I'm all for clean air. We should have that. having been in LA when it was terrible, we don't want pollution. So I'm all for that. You can have the car be performance oriented and have it be clean, but we both have to work honestly on this, them and us. And so if we work together, we can make the thing clean, and we can also, have it be performance oriented. What plugs do you use on LS Big Boost setups? The ones that we ran on the Big Bang motors, I think were Denso Iridiums. We've used other stuff, but the key element is to bring the gap down, and we run a cold plug. We run a 9 or a 10, and then we have the gap down at like 18 or so. Did they change the rules so California is not allowed to force other states? Well, California doesn't force other states to follow. That's just the other states following. California can't force another state to adopt the regulations that California has imposed. That's not a thing. You can't blame California for your other state doing the thing that you don't like. That's not California's fault. I want somewhat of a drag capable car, still be able to street race. I saw your truck plus cam kit was considering that as well. The ported 243 factory LS3s. Yeah, any of those will work. The 243s will work. The factory rec ports will work. That camshaft will work. I would just pick the camshaft based on how responsive you wanted the turbo to be. Best 6-liter, I guess, block to turbo. There's no best one. All of those will work. Ford seemed to have a Coyote for most bank account sizes. What kind of spark plug and gap on an NA heads cam? We use stock plugs. We might go a one range colder if we're hopping it up a little bit, putting a cam or whatever in it. Most of the time when we run these junkyard motors, I run the plugs that came from the junkyard. Sometimes we'll buy new ones, but if it's still running good, we just let them run good. You can bring the gap down if you want a little bit. It helps with the ignition system. If you didn't care about the power numbers and curve shape, how would you set up a 300-inch or smaller small block that goes to 10,000 naturally aspirated for a really fun street car? I wouldn't do that. I've never done a 10,000 RPM motor. So it's not a really fun street car for a 10,000 RPM motor, because it's going to be really, really highly strung, and it's going to have a gigantic cam in it, and it's not going to be very streetable if you want it to make power up there. That's not a street motor. I'm putting rebuilt heads on a 4.8 Gen 4 that blew out spark plugs after a tune-up by shop. Any thoughts on what to look for? Are you saying that it pushed the plugs out of the heads? Because if it did, the plugs weren't tight. That's not something that happens to LS motors. So something else happened. And you look for the same things if you're taking the motor apart. You look for the same things that you would look for if it blew the plugs out. Did it have water in it? Like, did it hydrolock them or something? What I would look for is signs of detonation. Are the bearings bad? I mean, if you have detonation, you could have hammered the bearings. Are the piston tops bad? Has it crushed the ring lands? Has it scuffed the walls? I mean, look for all the stuff that you look for on a motor. You're building a Callaway twin turbo. Nice. What engine management system would work best? Planning on running 8 injectors versus using the microfueler? That's probably a good idea. I think all of them will work on that. That's just a distributor and injectors. So a Holley setup will work on that, like a Holley with a universal harness. That's what we run on small block Fords and Chevys and big blocks and stuff. Anything with a distributor, we just run. It's a Holley HP or a Dominator. You could also run a Terminator X, I'm sure, and then just run the harness that's set up to obviously activate 8 injectors. That the injector harness is going to be the same, but that just takes the trigger off of like an MSD or something. You should have a standard for aftermarket performance that is similar to what cars in the 90s were doing. Well, you can have a higher standard than the 90s. You can have a modern standard. People have no trouble making the exhaust emissions clean, because that's not what this is about. This isn't about that number. This is about control and regulation and money. And it's not about, like I said, it's not about what the sniffer tells us. Tech said that turbo diesel was turning backwards and smoking when it shut off at part throttle. I went to see what he was talking about. Indeed, it was. The soot trap was plugged up. Oh, okay. What about air to water with an interchiller on a street car? A 93 Civic EG hatch would be better than an air to air just because of space. I don't want to cut my bumper up. An air to water works fine on the street. I have driven around thousands and thousands and thousands of miles with an air to water on my Sprint Turbo, and it works with an air to water. It works fantastic. You just have a separate heat exchanger, and since you're not running around in boost all of the time, the air to water is cold. As long as it's ideal not to have it in the engine compartment, where it gets heated up by the ambient temperature inside an engine compartment that has nothing to do with boost. Have you run a stock Coyote intake versus a Boss intake on a Coyote? I have. Yeah, way back we did that. I did it on a Gen 1. And a Boss intake loses power until the top. Makes a good bit of power more at the top, but loses it through most of the curve. Gen 3 or Gen 4 block for a 4.8, doesn't matter. Not really. I like the Gen 4 stuff because I like the same size head bolts. But either one of them will work. And since you're changing the internals, you don't get the Gen 4 internals. When I take the machine shop, bring the pulley and flex plate for balance. Crank says it's balanced, but I'll need a final balance, correct? No, the damper and the flex plate are neutral. So you don't need those. They don't need those to balance it. California doesn't force it, but when it comes to the economies of scaling, building cars, what plugs and gap do you recommend for a 6-liter of the G42? I would recommend something that's like an NGK TR, I don't know, 7 or something. And we run like between 18, the gap at 18 or 18 to 20 thousandths. Look up the intake Toyota is using on their new supercar. Blowing out plugs happens on the Fords. Yeah, I've heard that, but I never heard it on an LS. Is it true that, well, why is everybody jealous of California? I don't understand that. Well, I do understand it. Is it true that California doesn't offer engine swap, allow engine swaps? No, they do allow engine swaps. They 100% do. It has nothing to do with them being more efficient. They have to be the vehicle that you swap it in. I think the engine has to be newer than the vehicle that you're swapping it in. And one of the things is I don't think that they allow truck motors into cars and vice versa, which is unfortunate because there's so many more truck engines. Just riding snowmobiles today, kept fouling plugs. Maybe wonder what happens in a plug that makes it foul out. The tune is what happens. Is it a 2-stroke snowmobile? If it's not a 2-stroke, it's definitely the tune. Or burning oil, yep. Here's the new idea, boring a 6-liter to LS3 and adding 15 pounds of boost. No, you shouldn't. You 100% should not do that because you've made the block weaker by overboring it. There's no reason to have it be bigger. You can make all of the power you want by just adding boost. So that's not necessary. I can run my LS3 style rec port heads on an iron 6-liter. Yes, the factory did that. They ran rec port heads on factory 6-liter. So yes, you can do that. My experience with snowmobiles, fouling out plugs usually because the carbs have been rejetted or running rich on fuel. Yep. How are you going to swap a truck 5.3 into a Mustang? According to California, I should have had cancer 50 times over from all the race cars. You don't think California determines that? Are you involved with RHB sales? Yeah, it's my company, so definitely. I'm wondering when the Lubbock truck cancel ship. They're shipping right now. We have them in stock now. I've emailed to ask the status, but no response. Send me your, here, I'll give you my email address. Send me your information. We had a lot of back orders. When I say a lot, I mean a lot. Here's my email. Send me an email, and I will get your thing answered tomorrow. Not jealous of California. Your traffic, beer, and cheese are no good. I don't understand that. Weather doesn't outweigh it. California has everything, which is why people want to be here. California has snow, some of the best snow skiing in the world. We have deserts, we have high, we have low, we have most of the agriculture, we have beaches, it has everything. We are building an MR2 endurance race car. What year is the MR2? 15 hours over 2 days. K20 motor. I was looking at cam specs. 250 degrees stock and a 2-liter. That seems high. The stock cam specs in a K20 are good. I would use those, especially if I was doing endurance racing, because not only are they are you looking at aftermarket ones? I don't know why you would. Are you needing more power from an endurance standpoint? You could always go to the K24. Australia and QLD, require it to be the same for likes. If I'm doing a Coyote, I need a mod plate, even though it literally bolts into a 5.4. A friend of mine says you don't have to balance an engine if the pistons are less than 5% of the old pistons when only doing a piston upgrade. The aftermarket has pistons that are basically drop-in pistons, and I don't know who makes them. Maybe it's Summit that makes them. They have pistons that you can replace your pistons for and not have to rebalance it. But 5%, if all of the pistons are 5% more or less. Should I do longer push rods if I use factory rec port heads with your truck plus cam kit, or does it use it? It uses factory push rods, and the factory push rods are all going to be the same length. Whether it's a rec port head or a cathedral port head, they're all 7.4 or thereabout. Driving a slow car fast is more fun than driving a fast car slow. 130 inlet airs on twin air to water. Using dyno water at 13 psi. Is this back pressure issue? I don't know how you're pointing it at back pressure when you have an inlet air temperature problem. Why would you think that that's back pressure? Hello from Texas. I have a fully stock 94 F-150, 33-inch tires with GT40 heads and an E303, but a good upgrade. Also does tuning work. I don't know how you're going to tune it on the factory ECU and the factory EEC. The GT40 heads would be good, and the E303 cam would be good. If you're going to do that, you probably should just go with the. I just posted up a video on Explorer intake manifolds. Just don't use the elbow. Just you have it go straight, and then make your inlet tube the way that you're supposed to. But I don't know about the tuning on it. Do you know anything about Summit's balancer for trucks? Has a 25% underdrive. Worried about charging issues. Yeah, I haven't tested it. 25% seems like a lot of reduction. I would be worried about cooling and charging. 92 Endurance, 1992 MR2. Okay. So that's the newer body style, right? That's not like I had an 86. It's not that little one. Reading an article about rod to stroke ratio in it, they said bigger the ratio, the less vacuum it can create. Why is that? I've never heard that. The vacuum that the motor creates while it's running is going to be a function of other things besides the rod to stroke ratio. I love California, but would want to preserve its beauty. You could ski and surf on the same day. And we actually have done that. I've gone with my brother when we were going to Cal State Fullerton. We went snow skiing and then came back and then went to the beach down at Newport. It was nice. Regarding plugs, I mean, is it fuel grounding between the electrode and the wall? Some will clean up and others don't. Are you talking about your snowmobile thing? I don't know. If you have too much fuel going in, you have too much oil going in, if it's fouling, you have some sort of problem. It's usually, you could have not enough timing. It's supposed to be 35 degrees out. That's pretty cold. It's going to make me want to go jump in the old Maple River. I know it's amazing how much, at least for me, how much more cold I would put up when I was younger. Because we used to ski all the time. And I remember we skied up in Mount Bachelor. That's probably the coldest place I've ever skied because there was a storm going on and it had fresh powder every time we went up the lift. In fact, the lifts, the chairs, had snow on them that they had to brush off each time. And we were like the only crazy people up there that were doing it because we were young and we wanted good snow. You have a K24, just needs more than the running K20. Okay. And a K20, you know, it's a small one. It likes to rev. Think of not needing a 408 for boost, you don't. Let's have all the stuff and still do it. How much boost would you say the stopping point? There's no stopping point for boost. If you do a 408, you just decide how much power you want. The boost determines that. So 10 pounds of boost, like on a, let's say that it's a 550 horsepower 408, that's going to make a lot of power. It's going to be 250, 550, 800. Yeah, that's going to be up near 1,000. I think it would take a pretty wild rod stroke ratio to meaningfully affect the vacuum. I think so too. I think changing the stroke and making the motor smaller and keeping the camshaft the same could definitely have an effect on manifold vacuum, but I don't know that that's what he's talking about. Saigon's in the house, man. What's going on? Watch Shane's videos, 100 pounds of boost, 100 pounds of boost. Yeah, Shane does cool stuff. Love the advice. Your vids are helping me not spend a ton on this. Been dreaming about building 79 Malibu. In Malibu. Eyes so blue. In Malibu. If back pressure is high enough, will that push heat into the compressor side? Hard to believe inlet air temperature would be that high on 13 psi. Your tests on the air to water were in the 90s. How hot was the water that you're using? And then how hot was the temperature of the air going into the turbo and coming out of the turbo? And then are the air to water intercoolers too small? Is there a big pressure drop there? Is there a balance for you to recommend? Boosted 6 liter, 700 horsepower gold truck accessories. We use the factory ones, but ATI has good stuff. What happens when you have too much air velocity? For where are you having the air velocity problem? My Callaway has the IHI RHB 52s. Being my first turbo build, how might I go about getting information on its limits? They generally ran these on smaller displacements. Yeah, they're not going to make very much power. I mean, they were only sized to be immediately responsive. And then what did they make? Somewhere between 385 and 400 horsepower out of a 350-inch motor. So if you're going to want to make power, turbo upgrades are definitely going to be necessary. Did you say you went 225 in the Civic? Yeah, we went 226.8, I think is the official record. I want to make 850. You saw you make 625 NA. Yeah, and I wouldn't use that combination to make 850 because you don't need it. I mean, with very, very little boost and a milder 550 horsepower 408 with a smaller cam and lower compression, you're going to easily be able to do that. RHB 52 is 100 horsepower. It's got to be more than that because they made 400 horsepower with it. Can't wait to get this ball rolling. Ordering fuel injectors and valve springs in a few weeks. There you go. High air velocity usually means the port is restrictive, so you'll lose power. Yeah, where is this air velocity you're talking about? Are you talking about going through the throttle body, going through turbos, on the exhaust, in the head? Where is it? Dyno water and running in the same room as your picture also stop making power past 5,500. So what do you mean by dyno water? The dyno water can vary by 50 degrees. So some days the dyno water is near 100, some days it's 50. So it can change dramatically depending on whether it's a hot time of the year or cold time of the year. And if the motor stops making power at 5,500, there's an issue somewhere. That's what I'm curious about. If you use tiny valves on purpose but super high boost pressure, what magical combination are you talking about, and why would you do that? What was the setup in the Civic? It was a G class, so it was a 2-liter buildup. Your normal kind of thing. It had like Skunk 2 tuner cam or tuner 2 cams or whatever. It had a ported Type R style manifold on it. It had a ported I don't know if we use it. I don't think we ever use a GSR head, but a P30 or a Type R head, just a ported one. slightly bigger valves. And then it was we had two of them that we did. One of them was a dart block. One of them was a sleeve GSR block. So one of them had an 87.2 crank in it. The other one had an 89. Both of them had 84 millimeter bores. And so we ran it, when we ran one of them up on the dyno, it made 725 or so. But we never ran it at that boost level. We only ever ran it at 17 pounds. So it had an air-to-water intercooler with ice water. We had race gas in it. It would have made more power with E85 had we done that. That would have been better. We were running it with a Honda, so we only ran it at about probably 550 horsepower or 550 horsepower of the tire or something like that. When you go on vacation, we like to go to Mexico, actually. Puerto Vallarta is a good place for us. Getaway, what's going on? Got my electric accelerator pedal all built. Nice. Happy late birthday. Thank you, man. Building an LQ4 forge internals. I have L3 heads and intake. That's good. It's going to be a street engine with occasional trips. I was thinking the BTR Red Hot or Trek Plus, 800 horsepower and 93. Which cam? If this is running under boost, the 800 horsepower, either one of those cams would be fine. I think I'd pick a hot rod over a Red Hot for that, or our Trek Plus. Either one of them will do that. The 800 on 93 is going to take some tuning, I think. And on that note, it is time to go. I've been here more than an hour. That's what happens when we're all having fun. But I will see you guys all tomorrow.